Today's gospel has quite the relevance for what we do here on Sundays, at least from the viewpoint of our more Protestant brothers and sisters. It normally comes out in some form of, isn't that a Catholic practice, Father? Or, in other words, aren't you teaching as doctrines the precepts of men? I hear it all the time, actually, especially with regard to the liturgy. But before we get into what we do, let's look at what Jesus was accusing the Pharisees of doing. The Pharisees were members of a renewal movement within Judaism that sought to restore God's favor to Israel by adhering and to advocating for strict observance of the law and total separation from all Gentile defilement. This goes back to Deuteronomy 28, where God promises to bless those who keep his law and to bless them abundantly, and he promises to curse those who break the law and to curse them abundantly. So the Pharisees are convinced that God is cursing them, and they know the remedy. So they dedicate themselves to strict adherence to the law, all 613 laws. The rules the Pharisees were complaining about, Jesus' disciples not observing, came from Exodus 30, which mandated that priests ritually wash themselves, their hands and their feet, before offering sacrifices. And also from Numbers 18, which mandated that these same priests mandated them to have ritual purity, among other things, washing of hands, prior to eating their share of the sacrifice. This was originally just for the priests, but the Pharisees have extended it to all the laity as well. So basically what they are accusing Jesus' disciples of is not following their rules. They have unilaterally decided that their piety should be a rule for everyone within Judaism. It's kind of like a Lenten devotion, essentially. Imagine, say, someone gave up alcohol for Lent. And they said, okay, I'm giving up alcohol, and anyone I see giving up alcohol, they are just horrible people. And so how dare you have alcohol during Lent? Lent is an alcohol-free zone. It's very similar to this, just mandating your piety on someone else and be very offended. In fact, accusing them of rule breaking, they're no longer keeping the rules of Lent. It's very similar. So this is what Jesus gets upset about, them making their personal piety a matter of law. And even worse, stepping outside the established tradition unilaterally and lambasting those who still follow the custom. This is when Jesus brings in the prophet Isaiah. And actually what he says is a little bit different. In Isaiah 29:13 and 14 it says, "And the Lord said, because this people draw near with their mouth and honor me with their lips, while their hearts are far from me, and their fear of me is a commandment taught by men, therefore, behold, I will again do wonderful things with this people, with wonder upon wonder. The wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the discernment of the discerning men shall be hidden." So basically this is saying that they have gotten it wrong. So God will step in again and show them right. And so this wisdom will be forgotten. The wisdom of the people, their piety, it says, their fear of God has gone awry, as in their piety has gone awry. So God is going to step in and fix them with wonder upon wonder. And the wonder he sends them is actually sending them into exile. Jesus' quotation of Isaiah is a bit different. He says, this people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men. Jesus is condemning them here because they are condemning his disciples for not having Pharisaical piety. Jesus knows their hearts and knows that that when one starts mandating piety, especially piety outside that of the established tradition, that person is not doing it to increase the devotion to God, but to build up the rule and even the rule maker. Piety is something that can be taught. It's actually best when it is caught, because praying shapes believing. But piety can never be mandated. Laws for worship mean that there is a time when one can stop. Say, I've now gone far enough. I no longer have to do anything more. When we stop deepening our devotion, we stop growing toward God. This is why Jesus says that the Pharisees' worship is in vain. They have ceased growing and allowing other people to grow in their devotion to God and have begun to worship an idol. Now back to our business on Sundays. We do what we do here not because it is Catholic practice, which is what we get accused of all the time. Oh, that's too practice. We like to worship Jesus. But we do this because this is the practice established by centuries of tradition. When we genuflect, when we chant, when we carry on like we do so because this is the established practice, the fuller practice actually. We do the fuller practice because it allows for greater engagement with God. We use our whole bodies in worship. We stand, we sit, we kneel, we sing, we process, we do countless things with our bodies because God has given us our bodies and called them good and given us the ability to use them in the worship of Him. He's not only given us brains, we're not merely just brains with encasings around brains, the brains being the important thing. You know, the brains being the only thing which should be stimulated. This is why the sermon is only a part of our worship service here, not the entirety. We have to worship Him with our bodies as well to offer all of ourselves to Him. For this reason, we worship God. The worship of God also utilizes all of our senses as well. Each sense should be engaged to show us that no matter what, we can offer it to God. This is the reason this is one of the reasons, among many of the reasons, why we worship the way we do here. It gives us the opportunity each week to offer ourselves entirely to God, so that we get in the habit of offering ourselves completely to Him when we are not here as well. I said liturgy is better caught than taught. There are a number of things that are best experienced first and then taught the meaning later. Once it seeps down into the bones, it becomes second nature in a way that merely learning a concept cannot do. So what we do here each week is an exercise of our devotion, and it's of vital importance. Each week we have an opportunity to give ourselves fully to God, which is, I think, the opposite of what the Pharisees are being accused of, and that causes Jesus to tell them that they are worshiping God in vain. However, before we pat ourselves too hard on the back, we must remember that the Pharisees were not a problem because they decided to become more devoted to God than the average layman. They became a problem when they believed they had reached the pinnacle of devotion and could not grow any further, so they made a law for all. Anytime we stop offering ourselves fully to God so that He can show us more and use us more, we become a hindrance and our worship becomes to be in vain. God grant that this is never the case, and that our worship here is always such that we are in a state of growth toward Him. In the name of the Father, and the Son,